June 15, 2025, in a sharp escalation of regional hostilities, the Islamic Republic of Iran launched a direct and sustained missile and drone strike on Israeli territory late last night, marking a significant and dangerous turning point in Middle East tensions. This is the second time in recent months that Iran has conducted overt, state-sanctioned attacks on Israel from its own territory, a move that Israeli officials have condemned as a flagrant act of war. The Iranian attack, described by Tehran as retaliation for the targeted killing of IRGC Major General Hassan Madavi in Syria earlier this week, began just before midnight and involved more than 300 projectiles. A coordinated mix of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and unmanned aerial vehicles were aimed at military installations and strategic sites across central and southern Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces (IDF) reported that approximately 90% of the incoming threats were intercepted by Israel's multi-tiered missile defense systems, including Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow 3. Despite the high interception rate, several projectiles struck Israeli soil. The most severe impact occurred near the Ramat David airbase, where 2 Israeli reservists were killed and at least 7 others injured. Additional damage was reported in Beersheba and the Negev region, where infrastructure was disrupted and several civilians treated for trauma and minor injuries. Emergency services were deployed across affected zones, and security agencies remain on high alert. The government of Israel has vowed to respond decisively. In a televised address to the nation, Prime Minister Yonatan Halavai stated that Israel will not tolerate direct aggression against our people and territory and warned that Iran has crossed a red line that will be met with force. The Prime Minister emphasized that consultations with international allies were ongoing but stressed that Israel retains the right to act independently to defend its citizens and sovereignty. Tehran, meanwhile, has issued public statements through state media outlets claiming the strike was a proportional and justified response to what it called the illegal assassination of a senior Iranian official on Syrian soil. The Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs reiterated that Madavi was engaged in diplomatic and regional stabilization efforts, while senior IRGC officials warned of continued and intensifying responses should Israel retaliate further. In the immediate aftermath of the strike, the broader region experienced a ripple effect. Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon launched a barrage of rockets into northern Israel, prompting IDF artillery and air responses. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq claimed responsibility for 2 attacks on U.S. military logistics sites, one of which injured 4 American personnel. In Yemen, Houthi forces targeted Israeli-linked vessels in the Red Sea, renewing concerns over the security of global shipping lanes. The United States has issued a strong condemnation of Iran's actions. President Caroline Marsh stated in an emergency press briefing that the Iranian regime's reckless escalation puts millions of lives at risk and reaffirmed America's commitment to Israel's right to self-defense. The U.S. has since repositioned additional naval assets to the eastern Mediterranean and announced plans to bolster air defenses for regional allies. European Union officials expressed grave concern over the developments and called for immediate de-escalation. French President Emmanuel Tissier urged restraint, while German Chancellor Annika Kruger emphasized the need for an international mediation mechanism. China has called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, proposing a multi-party summit to stabilize the situation. Russia, while condemning the Israeli strike that killed Madavi, criticized Iran's overt military response and urged both parties to return to diplomatic channels. On the cyber front, both nations have engaged in retaliatory digital warfare. Iranian-affiliated groups claimed responsibility for temporary disruptions to Israel's municipal utilities and civilian transportation systems, while Israeli cyber units disabled several Iranian state media platforms and reportedly infiltrated infrastructure monitoring systems in western Iran. Inside Israel, civilian life has been heavily impacted. Schools in major cities remain closed, international flights were suspended for several hours, and shelters are still in use in regions considered at risk of further attacks. Hospitals in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Ashdod are operating on emergency protocols, with additional mental health resources being mobilized to address rising public anxiety. Authorities have called on the public to remain vigilant and to follow safety guidelines distributed through official channels. In Iran, public response has been mixed. While government-sponsored rallies were held in Tehran to celebrate the strike, Social media reports from independent sources inside the country suggest that public concern over the risk of full-scale war is growing. Protests have emerged in several cities, with citizens expressing fear that the regime is risking national stability for the sake of military pride. Energy markets have responded with immediate volatility. Brent crude spiked to over $131 per barrel, and regional airline traffic is experiencing significant disruption due to ongoing security concerns. Defense and intelligence agencies across the Middle East, Europe, and North America are monitoring the situation closely amid fears that any misstep could trigger a wider war, drawing in multiple state and non-state actors. As of this morning, Israel's security cabinet is in closed-door meetings evaluating a range of military response options. International diplomatic efforts, led by Qatar, Oman, and Switzerland, are attempting to open communication lines between Jerusalem and Tehran. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres issued a warning that the situation has reached a tipping point and called on both nations to pull back from the brink before the region slides into chaos. The events of the past 24 hours represent one of the most dangerous escalations in the history of Iranian-Israeli relations. The international community is urging restraint, but with each side claiming legitimacy and neither showing signs of de-escalation, the risk of a broader, sustained conflict is real and rising. Further updates will follow as the situation continues to evolve.